20 of these parent presentations we've been putting on with various speakers. And we'd like to share our information and knowledge with our various speakers who are knowledgeable, and myself sometimes, different category, no kidding. But this presentation, what causes negative behaviors and what to do about them. And the speaker, the presenter, is Dr. Mark Sundberg. I've known Mark for about 56 years. He's been, he and I
know longer than that.
Yeah.
9 months.
Yes. Mark and I both went through the same program with Jack Michael at Western Michigan University, and Mark learned much from Jack Michael. I learned from Jack Michael and Mark and the others. Mark was one of the people that spearheaded, between him and Jack Michael and a handful of other people, really spearheaded the verbal behavior research in the 70s at Croydon Avenue School, or at Kalamazoo Valley Multiple Handicap Center. It's about 7 different names now. And he started the journal, the first journal of verbal behavior, the Journal of Verbal Behavior, Analysis of Verbal Behavior in 1982. And he's been instrumental in the development of verbal behavior, Skinner's verbal behavior, and turned it into an application, the applied approach. So if you ever hear of applied verbal behavior, that started way back in the 70s. So a lot of the stuff we're talking about, Mark was tinkering around with this in the 70s. He tells me the story. Jack Michael came in to the school and said, "Why don't we try to teach these kids some mans?" Because no one ever thought about it back then. Can we teach these kids mans? That's where it all started. And since then, there's been hundreds of studies, research studies. And Mark has published over 50 papers, 4 book chapters, several books. Probably most noted for the VB map, which the earlier version, the Ables, started that in the 70s. The Ables started working on that in the 1970s. People don't know that. But that's where all this started, and now we're ended with the VB map. He started the first verbal behavior school. Is that fair to say? Star School.
It was
along with
our school in Kalamazoo, so it was actually the second.
Okay. Let's see. Hundreds of conference presentations and workshops. He won the Distinguished Psychology Department Alumni Award in 2001. And in 2013, the Jack Michael Award for Outstanding Accomplishments in Verbal Behavior. And he has always been my #1 mentor, and Mom always liked him best. Mark Sundberg, take it away. And say something.
Well, Mom would have been proud of both of us.
Yes.
And, certainly what you've done is something I could never accomplish. I won't dwell on this too long, but we have 8 kids in our family, and Carl was the baby, and I was number 7. And Carl had a tendency to, with 7 older siblings, Carl spent his whole life getting beat up, getting dragged around, no food left on the table, and he grew up saying, basically, I'm going to do better than every one of the kids. So everything that we would do, he would one-up us as we grew up. So like, my older brother Eric had the high school pole vaulting record. Carl broke his record. I used to be in plays. Carl wrote plays and designed and directed plays. I worked in schools for children with autism. Carl started his own school. That's been kind of fun. So I think our mother would be very proud of what collectively we've done. I'd like to acknowledge my wife who helped me put these things together. She is the parent expert. We have 2 kids, but she primarily works with parents who have children with disabilities, and the other way around, she works with parents who have disabilities and have varying degrees of children with various issues and such. And so a lot of the tidbits in here are from her. But let's kind of start out, and I'm going to go through some issues of just looking at common negative behaviors. And I'm going to just put some things up here, and kind of from early stuff into more complicated or difficult behaviors. So a lot of times we look at negative behaviors, and what starts out as seemingly kind of benign, looking away, non-compliant, kind of I don't want to do what you're asking to do. Self-stim is another kind of negative behavior that may kind of morph into not just looking away, but falling on the floor, which may kind of work its way into running from you. And you may begin to get the picture. Pretty soon we're climbing on tables, we're knocking things off. We may show a little bit of property destruction pretty soon. Then we have yelling and screaming, possibly, and crying. Tantrums, which you might talk about combinations of these different behaviors, property destruction, and things begin to get a little bit ugly as we move into aggression, negative behavior in terms of biting and so on. Ultimately, this often ends itself in injurious behavior. And so we see this kind of, let's say, progression of negative behaviors often that kids will demonstrate. And what some of the lessons are is that if we can begin to work back here and establish some of these, we potentially can offset the emergence of some of these. But yet the issue is trying to figure out negative behaviors today is what you're really concerned about. Is, you know, I know we can say your child has this and that, but one of the things to keep in mind is that everything on this list are negative behaviors that you're going to see at one time or another with typically developing kids. That is, all kids are going to throw tantrums, fall on the floor, and whine and complain and run from you, and so on. So there's nothing, it's not an autism-specific issue. It's a child issue, is that kids want to do what kids want to do. They don't necessarily want to do what you want to do on your terms and so on. And part of our role as parents is to teach children that, you know, there are some things they just have to do. You got to take a bath, you got to brush your teeth, you got to get in the car seat, you got to wear shoes, even though they don't want to do it. And so we have this kind of power struggle. And so part of what I'm after today is to give you some tools of how to sort through some of these things and ways to approach them. I put this up here because this is my mantra really today, is that behavioral psychology is a powerful tool. And that my suggestion today is going to be arm yourself, which is with as much knowledge as you can about basic behavioral psychology. And I'm going to kind of walk you through that and ultimately work you in the direction of internet resources, books, and so on. That is, the things I'm going to say here are not novel to the field, they're not mine, they're just common aspects of our field. If I were to ask how many people know what this is, the three-term contingency, and so some of you do, when I describe it, you're going to say, oh yeah, I know what that is. Because all we're talking about is that if we look at human behavior, we look at behavior analysis, if we look at a particular behavior like running from adults, what the three-term contingency tells us is that if you want to understand human behavior, look at what happens before that behavior, we call that the antecedent, and then look at what happens after the behavior, the consequence. And so the first phase I'm going to be after here is that one thing we want to know, in order to change a behavior problem, it's important to understand why it's happening. Why is the child running from you? And if we can identify that cause, it sets us up to do the right intervention. And so we'll walk through some of these. A common antecedent here is that I don't want to come in. So here we're putting a demand on the child, but we're competing with the child's current motivation. This child wants to stay outside. They want to do something. They want to engage in some kind of activity. So running from adults, well, what's that buy them? Maybe only 10 seconds, you know, maybe 20, but that might be just enough, you know, so we can say, you know, as soon as you turn on the bath water, your child is nowhere to be found if they don't like a bath, if a bath is aversive. Or as soon as you pick up a coat that indicates that they've got to give up the iPad or get out of the chair or move somewhere, that coat kind of sets the occasion for get out of there quick. And again, 10 seconds, 20 seconds, maybe longer than that. But the point here is that something as simple as delaying the onset of something undesirable can be part of the cause for why this happens. So that's just one example, because there's lots of causes, it turns out. And part of our task is to figure out which one is affecting your child today and with this behavior. And what I'll suggest is the exact same behavior running from adults can be caused by a number of different things. And so again, our task is to figure out what is the particular cause. And we're going to use that three-term contingency to look at it. And that's where, again, observational skills, as you're looking at a negative behavior, my suggestion is you step back, your spouse steps back, somebody steps back and tries to analyze what happened before that behavior. What was the antecedent? And again, what exactly are we talking about? So here I put define the behavior rather than say, well, he was a bad boy today. What did he do? Tell me what, I mean, did he look at my list? Did he fall on the floor? Did he break things? Did he hit his little sister? Define the behavior. Tell me what we're talking about. And let's start small. That is, you're not going to make the kid perfect in one intervention. You got to start with small steps. That is, it depends on the child. So if we say identify the antecedents, what happens before the behavior? Let's identify what the consequences are. What happens after the child runs? And I'm going to walk you through some potential scenarios for all of that. So again, we're going to use this ABC analytical tool to try and figure out what the cause is of a behavior before you're even going to try and do anything in terms of changing it. So let's look at some potential causes. Number one cause for negative behavior, reinforcement. And it's not that you're saying, you know, Neil, I really like the way you kicked your little sister. That was really cool. We don't do that. But what we might accidentally do, inadvertently, is look at Neil and scowl or somehow react. Shock value. We can't help doing that. That is, and that's why I put inadvertent negative reinforcement. So negative behavior may get you attention, a reaction. Reprimands are often reinforcers for kids. And there's a whole series of research on the effects of reprimands increasing negative behavior. So don't do that, stop that, quit that, and so on. May actually be simply attention that increases behavior. And for some kids, negative attention is better than no attention. And so we'll often make the case too that, and I'm going to make this point shortly, is that sometimes negative attention is a lot more exciting than good job. I'd rather see some real drama going on here and see mom get really upset or dad get angry and stuff starts happening and there's all kinds of action. I'm sitting here going, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, and you know, again, we know this simply by saying, does the behavior continue? The definition of reinforcement is that it follows behavior, it increases behavior. So if we see an increase in the negative behavior, that's a possibility. Negative behavior may gain access to reinforcement. That is, I push the other child and I get the swing. I grab the iPad from my brother, I get the iPad. And so again, you look at how just in the natural environment, just in our day-to-day interaction with the world, kids are going to get reinforced with negative behavior, whether you plan it or not, whether you intend it. And that's where, again, most of this is that the natural environment kind of reacts better to negative behavior because, again, it's shocking, it's hard to ignore, it's hard to stop. You got a child that's crying in public places. It's hard to deal with that behavior, and in a sense, the kid knows that. And here's my chance of getting what I want. Negative behavior also allows you to get out of stuff you don't want to do. It allows you to avoid things. And that's where, again, if you pick up the shoes and I run, that's going to allow me to avoid a little bit of something that I don't want to do. Negative behavior can also get you out of something. We call that escape. That is, I don't want to sit in the car seat. And so I scream and I tantrum and I engage in all kinds of behaviors. I start hitting my sibling sitting next to me, and I force the parent to react in some way in order to stop that kind of negative behavior. Another cause is that some negative behaviors are simply fun for the child. And that may not be such a great thing, but yet it turns out that sometimes you know, hurting other kids, I'm reinforced by aggression. I might be reinforced by breaking things and seeing them break. I might be I knock this off the table and it makes a loud noise, and I kind of enjoy watching it fall. Kids, cause and effect. Kids like to do that all the time. And so there's a naturally occurring behavior. It's just when it gets to $1,000 projector, then we get a little bit upset. We don't care if it's a toy or something, but that's another cause. and this is the point that we face, is that positive behavior is often boring. And kids, quickly learn that negative behavior draws attention in a way that positive behavior often doesn't. That is, negative behavior gets adults to do things, gets other people to do things, just in a way that often positive behavior doesn't work. And that's my example, that if you're engaging negative behavior, watching an adult get upset and telling you how bad you are is potentially a lot more interesting to the child than saying, good job, I like that, or even possibly an edible. Another problem that we see with kids who have negative behaviors is they don't have the skills in order to gain access to what they want to begin with. That is, they don't have the language skills, the language ability to be able to say, I don't want to take a bath now, can I delay it? Can I take a bath at 8? I'll tell you what, you'll find higher level verbal kids, then we can negotiate. We can say, here's your schedule, at 8 o'clock you take a bath. And you'll see that example shortly, where we can tell the child, here's what the contingencies are. That's not going to work so well with a child that doesn't have the verbal skills. So let's talk about reinforcement. So if we said that negative behavior is almost always caused by reinforcement, the issue is reinforcement's tricky. And I just like to give you some guidelines as to what it is. First off, it's anything that increases behavior. So if we say yelling at a child, I want you to stop that, quit fighting with your sister, it's potentially the case that that could increase fighting with the sister. How do you know? We record and measure the behavior if we want to get really serious about it. The definition of reinforcement is anything that increases behavior. That's the definition. So whether it's yelling at a child, whether it's taking away a toy, whether it's whatever it is, eye contact may turn out to be a really big reinforcer. A child does something negative and the parent just looks at him. Might be the parent scowls at the child. How do you know scowling is a reinforcement? The kid keeps doing it. And so there's kind of a basic beginning of reinforcement. Reinforcement can be getting good things. We all know about that we deliver kind of fun things for a child. And that's where, again, reprimands and negative attention can be reinforcers. And there's a good body of research that shows that. But keep in mind also, another type of reinforcement is getting rid of bad things. That is, I don't want to take a bath, sit down at a table, do trials. I don't want to share my toys. I don't want to get in a car. I don't want. So any behavior that delays or avoids those bad things is going to get reinforced. That is, if I engage in this tantrum and it slows down my getting in a car that I don't want to do, the tantrum is going to increase. So we say that reinforcement can be the delivery of good things, the delivery of what we think are bad things, can be attention, eye contact, or reinforcement can be removing bad things. Removing things I don't want, that's a type of reinforcement. So again, as we look at those two, they're often operating for our child. And here's our problem, is that reinforcement doesn't care whether we call the behavior good or bad. It does the same thing for positive. When we say, what is it? The child says, car, and we say, yeah, good job. Same behavioral effect of when the child hits a peer and we say, don't do that, and the hitting of the peer goes up. That is, anything that increases behavior can be good or bad behavior. And this is our battle here, is that most of this reinforcement occurs just through the natural interaction in the environment. Occurs on plan, on program. You're not designing it. You're not, saying, I like the way that you're spitting on people. We don't do that, but we look at it when we scowl. We might as well have said, I like the way you're spitting on people, if spitting goes up. And so our kind of rule is, be careful about how you react to negative behavior. And as we talk about intervention shortly, we'll suggest that there's one piece of the intervention is that. And we say that part of why I'm doing this is that this is going to be your most powerful teaching tool. And since it's your most powerful cause, the more you understand about the behavioral principle of reinforcement, the more tools you will have as a parent. The more options you'll have, the more kind of clearer understanding of why this is happening may occur. So here's the mantra, basically. both behaviors, both good and bad behaviors, are strengthened by reinforcement. So there's one of our kind of take-home points we're after. So how do we change this? Okay, so we said our first phase is to spend some time to try and figure out what's the cause. Now keep in mind again that you can have the same behavior that one day is caused by a lack of attention, that is, I can tantrum because nobody's paying attention to me. Or I can tantrum because I want to get out of having to sit at the table and finish my dinner. And now I'm going to tantrum. So the exact same tantrum at 5:45 can have one cause, and at 5:46 can have another cause. So it's not the case that negative behaviors are always caused by the same thing. Our task is to kind of figure out what's going on right now, because the interventions are going to be different. So we'll kind of walk you through that for changing it. But our main interest is, what do we do about those things? So the suggestion is to start out and identify, what do we say, he's been bad today. That doesn't help us. So we want to say, let's identify what behavior you want to target. And usually what I would do with parents is say, let's start out with just one or two simple behaviors. What irritates you the most? What is the biggest problem? And let's, as we're starting to do this, not take on massive, complicated problems, but some simple, workable problems just to be able to work through it. They may be things like self-care skills, letting me put the shoes on, that is, not grabbing the iPad from the sister, or whatever you might pick. So we'd first identify it. I've made this point, but this is very important, is that the way you're going to change the behavior is through reinforcement. Reinforcement is your teaching tool. Now remember, that's the cause of the problem, typically, but it's also your tool for changing it. And that's where, again, we say this all comes back to trying to acquire as much knowledge as you can about the concept of reinforcement. So we do an intervention. There's three components to it. Now remember, our first step is figure out the cause. So once we're ready to change the behavior, and we've defined it, we're going to talk about prevention, how to stop the problem. We're going to talk about how to reinforce alternative behaviors. And third part is, we need to make some change in the current way that you react to the behavior. That is, some change needs to be happening. And that's why early on I said, what do you typically do when the child tantrums at the table to get away from lunch? And if tantruming is still happening, that needs to be changed. So something different. And that's where, people say, well, how's that working for you? What I do is tell them how bad it is. Well, is it working? And if it's working, that's great. If it's not working, we got to change it. We got to do something different. And what I'm going to suggest is that behavior intervention programs that work have all three of these elements. So just changing the consequence isn't enough often. We've got to teach the child what it is they're supposed to do. And third, we got to be careful with what causes that. And then again, some prevention things. And as I talk about some of these, that may help sort through this. Let's talk about interventions for minor behaviors. I'm going to give you two kind of scenarios. I'm going to talk about minor behaviors, and then we'll progress into more complex behaviors. So if we look at minor behaviors, and they may not be minor to you, but relative to self-injurious behavior and aggression, knocking things off the table, making noise, whining, fidgeting, what might be negative behaviors. And again, keep in mind, all of these are often the same behaviors typical kids are going to emit. But for whatever reason, we're saying they're minor kind of behaviors. If we say, what's the potential cause? So if we pick one of them and we say whining. So whining is basically the target behavior that we'll play with as this list. So if we say, what's the antecedent? And we identify, when does he whine? And it may be that when he's not getting enough attention. And again, there can be many causes, but let's say that that is the cause, seeking attention. So what do we do if negative behaviors are attention seeking, which a lot of them are. A lot of negative behaviors basically, there's not enough action here, I'm not getting enough attention, I need something to happen. So what's our intervention? Okay, so here's the steps of the intervention, is prevention. And if we look at negative behavior, Part of what we're after is to say, it's not constant. It happens under certain circumstances, certain times. And it may be the case that we identify that when you're busy, when you're trying to cook dinner, or you're trying to take care of issues, or you've got other sibling problems, chances are that's a high probability session that whining is going to get to me. But what about me, Mom? You're busy doing these other things. And I think all of you know that, is that the biggest problem is when you've got to get something done. You've got to do something that you absolutely need. The kid knows that, and the negative behavior basically allows them to cut into your plans a little bit. And so prevention then would suggest, if I'm going to target whining, and I know that whining is going to happen more when I'm doing dinner, or when I've got to pay bills, or I've got to do something for work, or some other thing, then I need some kind of plan in place. That is, I need some alternative activities for my child during that time period. I need to set up other reinforcers. And part of it is just to be aware of the fact that this negative behavior may occur more likely under these circumstances than others. And some of them can be avoided, some of them can't. But we would say that for as many as you can, try and reschedule things, plan activities that will engage your child during those time periods that you might have. Step 3 is, what is the child supposed to do then to get attention? So we can't just say what we're going to do is have you do something different. It doesn't solve the child's issue. The child's issue is, I want your attention. Well, how do I do that? If I don't get enough attention, negative behavior will work just fine. And it may be, and again, I just throw this out here, 10 to 30 times an hour is just a number. That is, it may be that what we need is, you can't, and you may already know this, if I'm giving my child full attention for an hour, I get no whining. Well, I can't do that all day long. I got to do other things. But what I might find out is I can give them over the hour 10 or 15, 20-second interactions, or 30 seconds, a couple of 1 minute, 2 minutes. Interactions of various kinds, again, may help in the sense of it may allow me to identify some positive behaviors. That is, the child is engaged with a coloring book, or the child is engaged with a toy or some activity. Go up and give them attention. Give them then the attention that they're seeking. Here's a big point about the difference of that. The attention is delivered on your terms versus the child's terms. And that is such a huge difference. It's the exact same attention. But the issue is, it's following your identified positive behavior than the child's chosen negative behavior. One saying that I should have as one of the mantra is, whoever controls the reinforcement delivery controls the behavior. So if the child is controlling your attention, they're controlling you. That is, I'm now going to come over. I got this stuff I got to do. I'm trying to do a PowerPoint for a presentation I got to give tomorrow at work. I got to get this done. And now the tantrum makes me leave my presentation. Now that exact same attention, I can say, when you're playing with your sister nicely, I'm going to give you that exact same attention. It's on my terms. And that's where I can select whether I want to deliver my attention for positive behavior, or you're going to force me into delivering it for negative behavior. And that can help us sort through some of those things. And that's where, depending on the child and their history, this is not something you're going to do once or twice a day. And again, we look at kids need a lot of attention. There's a lot of time that goes into child rearing for sure. Our fourth step is we've got to do something to reduce the negative behavior. And basically your choices to reduce negative behavior are two. You either have to ignore it or punish it. And I'd suggest that in this situation, ignoring a negative behavior is a much easier, graceful, less negative way of changing behavior, and it often works quite well. Now again, if we have a negative behavior, let's go back to whining. Say your child's like, all right, now if we look at the child we potentially reinforce. If we say, now what's the matter, you know, that's a big reinforcer, and that sucks us in to say, come on now, it's not, I'll be, you know, I'll be with you in 10 minutes, you know, da, da, da. We've already reinforced the behavior. We've lost kind of that war. So part of the skill of using ignoring, extinction, is to really get good at it. I'm going to give you some tips about how to ignore negative behavior. You don't want to necessarily, you're not ignoring the child, but you're ignoring the behavior the child is emitting. And so I'm not going to tend to whining per se, but I can still attend to my child. But whining isn't going to, I'm not going to say stop whining, I don't like the way you whine, and so on. I want to try not to do that. There's other causes though, and again, we're not sure what the cause is. Yeah, maybe it's attention seeking, but maybe it's not. Maybe they don't want your attention, but they still whine, or they still do other minor negative behaviors. Again, it may be that whining is a man. Whining is that I don't have a way to express to you what I'm currently needing. I might need something. That is, what I need is the battery is dead on my iPad and it doesn't work anymore. And so now I'm whining because of my iPad. I don't want attention, I just got a problem. And I can't solve that problem, and I don't have the language skills to be able to engage you into the solution of the problem. And that's where, you know, part of what we've always focused on, and Carl continues that here at Baca, is that children need a solid man repertoire. That is, they need to be able to express their needs and wants. And we look at that starts early on with just being able to ask for edibles and toys and so on. Well, pretty soon kids need to ask for verbs. Fix it, move it, get out of my way, something's stuck. They need to add man for adjectives. That is, I really wanted the big one, or I wanted it for a long time, or you need to be able to man for adverbs. That is, it doesn't go quick enough. I want it to go quicker. It's got to go quick. It's too slow. It's too slow. So if a child can tell you that the problem with their iPad is that it's bogged down. It's just, it's not changing. Something's wrong with that. It's not operating. So those are complicated mans. But yet, that's a piece of it. And again, we see the exact same issue with typical kids, where they can't express the problem. It's like, well, what's wrong? I don't know. Well, we don't do very well either, often, explaining our emotions. But yet, that's a potential cause. And that's where we're always focusing on developing language skills. In a sense, because they're one of our best, most powerful preventers of behavior problems as we can work through it. We'll see some of the things we can do with a higher verbal child is different than we can do with a child that has minimal language skills. We're going to do different types of intervention. I'd mentioned we're going to provide man training, and we already talked about that. It's not so hard to teach a man. Let's look at another cause. There may be other reasons. My demands are too hard. The curriculum, and often, you know, I've worked for, I don't know, a bunch of different agencies and programs and schools and so on. And over the years, for the last 10 years, I've worked for the public school systems, and often the way that they want to use a behavioral psychologist is for negative behavior. So I'm called into a classroom and we got this kid that's beating up another kid in the classroom or falling on the floor or whatever it is, and we want a behavioral intervention plan. The first place I look is the curriculum. What are you asking them to do? What's the antecedent? I'm back to that antecedent issue. And quite frequently, the issue is that the academic demand is too complicated. It's too hard. You're working on adjectives for this child who doesn't have nouns. They're struggling with nouns. Now you want them to modify a noun with its property, with its features, with its shape and color and texture, and they can't even get the noun right. You want them to do noun-verb combinations. You want them to make their bed, and they can't do it. They're not able to, or you want them to engage in a task that they don't have the skills. So the task is too hard. That's a potential cause, and that's where, you know, I put up here out of developmental sequence. Or you want the child to do something that they could care less about. It's irrelevant to them, possibly. And that's where, again, it's an analytical tool that you're going through this kind of checklist of why is he whining? Is it to get attention? Is he whining to get out of something? Is he whining because he doesn't have words for what the problem is? What's the cause? Because the issue is you're going to do something different for each one of those potential causes. as I kind of walk you through some of this stuff. So if we looked at curriculum, that's part of where we use the VB map, is to say, in a classroom or in a program, we want to make sure that the child's intervention and the tasks are at the level that they're at, slightly up. That is, we're working on getting nouns. Now we want nouns generalized. We want noun-verb combinations. We're going to stay away from prepositions, adjectives, and adverbs until this is mastered. So we may do the same thing with making the bed. That is, it may be simply just putting the blanket up on top of the pillow is, yay, you made the bed. And we know that's the way we do it with typical kids, that we take our demand, whether it be getting dressed, eat your dinner, independently eat, sit at the table for 10 minutes. Maybe we start out, we say sit at the table for 1 minute, and then we progress to 2 minutes, if that's the issue. And again, it gives you a strategy of being able to say, let's look at the negative behavior, and there may be 2 or 3 or 4 pieces of this that I need to do. And one piece, again, is to look at the task, break it down into small steps, and start at a level where the child's going to be successful. And again, this is if you identify that this is what the issue might be. So how do we use reinforcement? You got to make sure you have one. And part of what we do is preference assessments. Which one do you have? You observe the child. You kind of find out what's valuable for the child at that moment. There's a concept in our field called immediate reinforcement. And partly what we're always after is that when you deliver a reinforcer, you want to make sure it is right after your target behavior. 10 seconds is too late. There's too much other behavior going on. So if we say, what I want to reinforce now is the child at least sitting down next to his sister without any kind of negative behavior. So we see the child go, sit down, we've got positive behavior, get in there and reinforce. Now eventually we might say, let's increase it to where we want 10 seconds of sitting with the sister, 15 seconds. But if you start out and you say, we want you to sit with your sister without disrupting her for 2 minutes, you may never get it, but you make it 10 seconds. And then you work your way up. Part of the reason of immediate reinforcement is that whenever you deliver a reinforcer, so if I now just make eye contact with your child, whether you plan it or not, if eye contact is a reinforcer, you're going to increase whatever behavior the child is doing at that second, planned or unplanned. And that's the way reinforcement works. It doesn't distinguish between good or bad behavior. It strengthens any behavior it's closest to. And that's where learning about it and being careful with reinforcement can really help kind of move things on in terms of making some kind of behavior change. But we used to have a rule at our first school. We had signs up on the wall that said, catch them being good. And that's the mantra there. Catch them being good. Reinforce positive behavior, catch them, have it being immediate, catch them in the act, whether it's attention, whatever the reinforcer might be. We would like to set up lots of opportunities for good behavior, as opposed to just kind of wait for them. And it may be, good behavior can be anything from simply naming pictures, from showing imitation. Hey, let's do this. Can you go into the room and see if you can find me a spoon. Go into the kitchen and get me a spoon. Child gets you a spoon. An opportunity, good and correct behavior. We used to have a saying also, and I think this is certainly still relevant. No real data on this, but we used to say 10 reinforcers for every negative. That is, anytime you find yourself, no, stop that, don't do that, which, they were kind of in the punishment realm, which there's certainly still a role for that. But if you're going to use punishment, as in reprimands, you need a lot of reinforcement to offset it. So again, the general rule is to do that. I did my master's thesis on teacher praise and reprimands, and we went into public schools, and it was almost 100% reprimands for negative behavior. Stop that, don't do that, quit that, get down out of there. And almost, and these were for our target kids that we were trying to transition into the public schools, almost nobody praised the kids for positive behavior. And then they were blaming us that we didn't teach them right. And so we had none of this negative behavior in our classroom. You know, and I remember this one little kid, Frank, you know, and they started reprimanding Frank. Boy, he took off, you know. People are going to give me attention for climbing on a table. I haven't had that kind of attention in a year at this other program. Now all of a sudden everybody gets bent out of shape. Guess what? He's on the tables all the time. And so how do you go into the classroom then and say, well, it's your fault, you know, but that was what we're after. Keep your reinforcers varied. Don't assume praise is a reinforcer. I don't know if I said this, but or going to say it, but we might think, oh, I like that, good job. That may be of some value, but keep in mind that words are fleeting and that they may be valuable once or twice, but pretty soon, good job, and I like that. We may not have reinforcing value. So again, we want to use a variety of reinforcers. There's a concept in behavioral psychology called pairing. You know, we want everything doesn't need to be contingent and like here's the plan and the program, but we spend a lot of time saying they're kids, they're 3 or 4, play with them, have fun, deliver reinforcers non-contingently, have fun with the child. What again you're finding, there's a lot of positive effects. There's a whole series of research on what's called non-contingent reinforcement. And typical kids get a lot of non-contingent reinforcement. We attend to them, we talk to them, we interact with them. Same with your child with special needs. Make sure that they get a fair amount of reinforcement that's free, that's non-contingent. A piece of the research shows that non-contingent reinforcement reduces behavior problems. And some of this research is with some more severe behavior problems like regression and tantruming. And again, it goes back to reinforcement's a powerful tool. It not only caused your problem, it's the solution to the problem once you kind of begin to see things and how they work. And this is the kind of goof around and kind of have fun with the child. Part of it is trying to show the child that you are genuinely interested in the child. You're not placating them, or that you're not there and you're their parents. Of course you're interested, but yet we're all, as parents, we got all kinds of stuff and demands and so on. And I look back and I think, my kids are in their 20s, you know, and you think, man, it's like, I didn't give them enough reinforcement. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. You want to say, you want to ask them, you know? Was I an okay dad? You know, I'm scared to, you know, say, okay, well, everything seems to be okay, but yet the thing is that kids know. They know whether you really are with them or are you multitasking. And I think in now society, we are all kind of forced into multitasking. It's so tempting, and it's just hard not to, oh, just let me peek, just see, you know, something's going on, I might get some kind of reaction, but it's a big one. This is back that some kids, if you don't give them the 30 to 50 reinforcers an hour, they're going to take them from you. And again, it may be that certain things become reinforcing that you didn't intend them to be reinforcing, like negative attention. Engagement, again, if we say sincere engagement is often a nice form of reinforcement. And this one again is that this lack of reinforcement may be potentially a cause of some of the negative behaviors. I'm just going to list some examples here in categories of social reinforcers, activity reinforcers, and material ones. I think what I'd like to do for a moment here is pause and see if there are any questions or particular examples, and maybe play with some examples that you might have in terms of particular behaviors on the part of your child. Any comments, questions? Do you want to take a shot? I think being analytical is really powerful if you begin to analyze what's happening in child behavior. The thing is, we often don't have time to do that. You know, we're reactionary to negative behaviors, and it's hard often to step back and break it down. Let's move into more difficult behaviors and look at those. And, here we'll give you some tips about ignoring negative behavior, because it is a little tricky. Anybody hear of an extinction burst? Okay, so if behavior A doesn't work, so I'm now going to whine a little bit, I don't get the attention. If I'm doing this, I might then progress into pulling that person's hair. That's called an extinction burst. And if behavior A doesn't work, I try behavior B, I try C, I try D, and inadvertently we begin to discover that the child jumps right away to self-injurious behavior. So that's something to be prepared about. Here's the good news. And again, this is something where there's a long history of research on this. So behavior is going along, and we now decide, and it's happening at this rate, this is my pretend graph, and then we ignore it. The first thing that's going to happen is the behavior is going to shoot up. That is, the behavior is going to get worse before it gets better. Be prepared for your extinction burst. Negative behavior is going to occur more because, after all, this has always worked. This has worked for the child, and all of a sudden it's not working. Didn't you hear me? Didn't you hear me? And then you got negative behavior that just shoots up. What you want to be careful about is to reinforce in a burst. And the tricky part is that as parents, we're often in a trap when that burst now involves aggression toward other kids, self-injurious behavior, property destruction. They're now going to go for important pieces of art on the wall with a knife. Well, you're trapped. You're in a kind of behavioral trap where you're kind of stuck. And that's where the prevention element, a lot of times I say with negative behavior like that. So let's say that the burst is now, I'm going to take a knife to a valuable painting. You got to interrupt, you got to stop. You've lost that battle, but learn from that for the next one. So you kind of analyze and prevention and so on. A lost battle isn't bad. Take it as a learning experience. You're not going to win them all, but when you have to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do, say, now, what would I have done differently? Is there some way, like what evoked that behavior? Was there a prevention thing? Maybe I should have reinforced more often. Those are the kind of analytical things that we would sort of throw in there. I've made this point, but be real careful about eye contact. And eye contact may be just as good as giving a child the iPad or candy or whatever the reinforcer might be. So be careful about facial reactions, eye contact, following a negative behavior. And that's one of the things, again, that we intensively work on with the staff, is teaching them not to show a reaction to a negative behavior. And that's really hard. Again, as staff come in, they're working with kids, and they may not appreciate the fact that just their facial expression is all that it takes. And don't argue, scold. Don't try and talk the child out of it. Why? Because it's probably going to be attention. So reprimands, don't do that. There are certain circumstances where those indeed are punishers. By punishment, it's anything that decreases behavior. So it can be a verbal punisher, it can be a reprimand, it can be a loss of opportunity, a timeout arrangement. Those are all powerful tools to use. Be careful about showing any kind of anger. And again, I just put in here because they can be reinforced as reinforcement. Act absorbed in some other activity. That is, if the child's whining, you're writing checks out, or you're doing something, you're engaged in some other activity. Walking away is actually a punishment procedure. That is, if the child's whining and they're engaging in negative behavior, walk out of the room. Often what happens is the kid's going to follow you out of the room. And that tells you right away the source of control is your attention. And so it's more like, okay, now let me control that a little bit. A point I forgot to make is that when we see an extinction burst, we like it. Why do we like it? Because it tells us exactly why they're doing it. They're doing it because they're not getting our attention, they're not getting our reaction, and they keep hitting harder and harder and harder. Why? Because they want the attention, or they want a reaction, or they want a particular item. After it stops, that's the time to reinforce. So we often, depending on the situation of the child, we might say 10 seconds of calm behavior, of non-whining, and 2 compliance responses. That is, you stopped whining. Hey, do this for me. And can you grab that pillow over there for me? Okay, great. And now I deliver reinforcement. My terms. No whining, and you got positive compliant behavior. Little things. But again, you're shaping up a personality. You're looking at a little mind kind of growing through things. And as you get into that pattern of trying to catch positive behavior and not reacting to negative behavior, and again, I think somewhere out here I've got the phrase, choose your battles. Well, that's going to come up in this one. Okay, so let's look at more serious behavior problems, and these are things that cause us more difficulty, and those are things like aggression and tantruming and property destruction, and some of those. How does the analysis change? Now, what I'll suggest is the framework is exactly the same. We've got to figure out what's the source of control for aggression. So if the child then is pulling hair, why? Why are they doing it? And so we're going to do antecedents, again, possible causes, adult demand. I now am going to tell you you've got to do something you don't want to do, and what that evokes now is throwing the items and so on. If we were to show videos, I've got a little video of one of our classroom teachers just sitting down with a child. She picks up a bag of materials, and just picking up that bag of materials, the child starts screaming and tantruming and just causes all kinds of havoc, and all she did was pick up the materials. And the analysis of that is, from the kid's point of view, it's like, uh-oh, that's not good. That means she's going to make me work. And just that little bit evoked the screaming, the negative behavior, the tantruming. He then extinction burst because she just kept going on, and where he knocks the materials off the table on the floor, and just watch this totally unfold. And again, what it does for us is allow us to understand the child better, and to be able to say he has learned these behaviors. He wasn't born with them. He has learned that these negative behaviors will stop adult demands. They'll slow them down in some way. And again, if that's happening, we got to come up with some kind of intervention. This is another big problem, is that you can't have the iPad all day, you can't stay in bed all day, you can't have all the ice cream, you can't do nothing. There are demands you've simply got to comply with, you've got to give up reinforcers, and so part of that is teaching a child to be able to give up things, and I think I've got a few points on that. And I put this in caps just because it is a big issue, is that the child has learned that negative behaviors will remove or delay a teacher or parent's demand. And again, that's where negative behavior controls parent behavior and controls teacher behavior. And part of it is just that kind of poker face, just go right through it. If I had this video to show, what the classroom teacher does is she just continues on with the procedure, and there's the negative behavior is not going to do things. I'm running the video when she does this, and I pick the materials up and put them back on the table. I don't make the kid pick them up because, again, I'm worried that that's too much attention. We're going on with our session. We pick up the materials, and the child looks and goes, "Who's that guy?" It's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to kind of tell me, I guess you don't want to work now, and you should be doing something different. Okay, so prevention is a big step in this one. So if we look at aggression and tantrums and so on, you don't want to get to the point where the child's taking a knife to your painting. You don't want to get to the point where a child's causing bodily harm to other kids or detaching their retinas. You don't want that to occur. And again, the prevention things in terms of demand, language training, adjusting schedules and so on, carefully trying to plot out what situations does this happen. And it may be, again, that if it's always at the pool, and if it gets to be real serious where they're hurting somebody, then we need to say, well, maybe we should go, let's try that in a couple months. But yet if it's a behavior that happens not just at the pool, it happens everywhere. You can't keep doing that. But yet, there are ways of saying, let me work on compliance, let me work on a few other things. Maybe I can do swimming at home in a smaller pool. Maybe if I take him in the pool, maybe if it's the same, and so there may be some modifications of your pool curriculum that may allow you to kind of prevent the problem, prevent the onset of what we would call a motivating operation. That is, I don't want something. And again, our step 3 is always that point of we got to teach a child what it is they should do. What in this circumstance, what is the positive behavior that we're at, and then our step 4 is the negative. So let's look at prevention in a little bit more detail. Let's identify the high probability problem areas. That is, if they're in the grocery store or if they're visitors come to the house, other people are around, what are they? Initially avoid demands that compete with powerful motivators. And again, this is the point I made before of your swimming example, is that if you want your child to do something when they're currently doing something they really enjoy, you're in trouble to compete against those motivators. So wait until those motivators have dropped, and things will be a little better. If you'll pardon an example to my puppy, I'd like to give you one. We have a new dog, not so new anymore, but we've worked really hard on being good dog parents. And we've got really good stimulus control. She can do all kinds of tricks. She's got all these skills that are wonderful, unless there's a squirrel. And if there's a squirrel and she's loose, she bolts, and she just, we have no stimulus control whatsoever. As soon as that powerful motivator of the squirrel, she won't do anything we say. You know, and we're like, she runs out in the street, she goes down to, we got a park down there, she goes all the way down to the park. You know, we're like, she's in danger. But what we certainly know is that we cannot compete with the motivation she has to catch that squirrel. And the take-home point of that is that if a child has a really strong interest in something going on, they're not going to hear you at all. You can sit there and talk to them, and you don't even exist. And so you may be saying, you know, you need to go to bed, you need to do this, you know, you're going to struggle. So again, this issue is early on, we want to avoid demands that compete with these really powerful interests a child might have. We can verbally prepare a child. You get it for 1 minute. You're going to go swimming. At 5 o'clock, we're going to go swimming. We might have to do a little clock with the pool. We can say that you know, here's the situation. You're going to go over to somebody else's house. They're going to watch you for an hour. So again, it depends on the level of your child, but if the verbal behavior is at that level, let them know. Prepare them for the onset of something that you know is going to be problematic. And again, have it in small steps, so you only are going to have a babysitter for 10 minutes or 20 minutes, something like that. Use the if-then contingency for more verbal kids. And by if, it's like, if you swim, then you get the iPad. If you sit with your sister for 10 minutes, then this is going to happen. We all kind of operate on that. That is, if you go to work, you're going to get a paycheck. So there's nothing odd about an if-then kind of contingencies. And little things like if you know that there are situations where there's problems and you've got to do things. I put up here the example of the doctor's office. Take stuff with you that allows you to keep the child engaged. If they got to go to the dentist and they don't, they hate the dentist and so on, prepare them, arrange for it. We often will do role playing where we can pretend you're in the dentist chair, and we get there and we've got other activities, we've got lots of reinforcers. And again, there's really nothing different that I've said here today that we wouldn't do with typical kids. We may have to get a little more careful about it for our child with autism, but yet these are standard kind of parenting things that you all face, is that any 3-year-old is going to be struggling in church. You know, you're gonna have a rough time getting a kid to sit there for an hour. You know, I was raised Catholic. Sometimes it's like an hour and a half. You know, it's like, I've heard this. Okay, ask for the same behavior under less high probability problem times. And that's where, again, going back to our puppy, is that we can get that behavior, but again, the issue is, the real challenge is when she wants to chase squirrels. But we know right away we're going to run into problems with that. And so what we're after is that if she's in the house and sees a squirrel and knows she can't get it, we can run a couple of trials and she'll respond. So in a sense, if we say, let's get the child to do things with only tiny bits of the competitive thing there, low level. So it's like, well, you know, I don't mind putting my toe in the water, or just kind of easy things. I can break the demand into small steps, where I just want the child not necessarily to sit at the table for the whole dinner, but for 30 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes. Be clear in what you want the child to do, again, depending on verbal level. this thing is huge. It's so hard, there's no way you're ever going to be perfectly consistent. It's impossible. You can think that you can, but the world is arranged such that, you know, if you're 60, 70% consistent, you're way ahead of the game. It's hard to be on top of catching every behavior and ignoring. I mean, I go into classrooms all the time and say, I just reinforced it. Sorry about that. I didn't mean to look, but I just reinforced a negative behavior. It's impossible not to be perfect in all of that. Establish time limits for reinforcers. Use extra time for reinforcers if you have no tantrums. Okay, so step 3, teach the positive behaviors. We got to obtain the most powerful reinforcers. If a child is getting that reinforcer free all the time, that is, again, I just keep using the iPad because that's become a big thing for so many of our kids. If they have free access to the iPad a lot, now again, there's nothing wrong with non-contingent reinforcement to some degree, but if it's always free, it's going to be harder to teach a child they got to do something to get access to it. So that's where it might be, you know, it's free for 10 minutes, but we got a timer, we've got something that here's your access here. Carefully control and deliver those reinforcers. You know, again, the iPad is yours, really. You bought it, you control its delivery, you make it contingent and use it. And removing the iPad as a form of punishment contingent on negative behavior is perfectly fine. If I've got my iPad and somebody tries to take it from me, my sister wants to share it, and I knock my sister over, boom, you lose the iPad. Boom, gone. So taking away reinforcers is probably one of the I'd say the most physically contacted negative form of punishment. That is, you lose opportunities. And that's where a timeout kind of procedure, when our kids would say run out in the street, if they wanted to be outside, they lose outside. That is, now you've got to come inside. You lose a reinforcer. You lose access to the iPad as a function of the negative behaviors. And so that's some of our point here. Here's our pairing, we made that point. You know, our demands sometimes, if again we start out with low and easy demands, we're going to be more successful. And this is a demand, do this. Now, again, it may be that what our demand is I want you to sit at the table, I want you to brush your teeth. And it might be, again, the brushing the teeth is such a high demand. It might be, again, small steps. I'm going to brush your teeth. Just put it in your mouth for 2 seconds. Hey, you brushed your teeth, deliver reinforcement. Then 3 seconds. And so this would be an easy demand to try and work your way into higher level demand. Lots of opportunities. Again, we say that if you count the negative behaviors or negative attention on a given day, you might find there's dozens of them. We want to provide lots of opportunities for the positive stuff. I'm going to gradually increase the demand, try and keep things reinforcing. We work in small sets. You know, that is, it can be one trial, can be 10 seconds, 20 seconds. We're going to try and do it in all environments. Generalization to other adults then becomes a piece of this. Now we're going to gradually increase our high probability demands and things like giving up reinforcers, giving up the iPad. One of the procedures that we use with a lot of kids who refuse to give up toys is that when they do give it up, we immediately give it back to them. And so they learn. A lot of times the kids who refuse to give up toys are at the verbal level that they don't have the man to be able to ask for it correctly to get it back, or they're unsure of when they're going to get it back, and so on. So that's where being specific, setting contingencies can kind of help with that. We like to always end an interaction on a positive note or some kind of compliance or some kind of positive kind of behavior. We got to do something to weaken the negative behavior. And that, again, is our fourth step. Whatever currently is happening, it may not be effective. So with extinction, we're going to remove, do not remove the demand. We kind of talked about that. You will still brush your teeth. If I'm going to throw a tantrum, that tantrum is not going to stop that toothbrush from going in your mouth. That's actually the extinction of the tantrum behavior. I'm going to follow through with the demand in the sense of you are going to get in the car. You are going to share the toy. Be prepared for your extinction burst. Make your expectations clear. Removing the demand will make the problem worse. Punishment is also an option, but punishment is again tricky, and I alluded to that before. And the issue with punishment is that you're paired with that. You're the one delivering bad things. And there's absolutely no way you will ever raise a child without some degree of punishment. That's kind of the nature of things. And so, you know, we're always, well, you should never punish your child. Well, the issue is punish carefully and make sure that when you are using a punisher, that, you know, again, the ones I suggested were things like removing reinforcers, loss of opportunity, loss of freedom, as opposed to physical punishment, as opposed to belittling and scolding and all of that. The way to deliver the punisher is firm, quick, and in control. Go to your room. Boom. The issue is you got to be careful that your punishers are not used for all kinds of behaviors. So generally we'd say is, if you're going to use a punisher for a child, make sure that it's a defined set of behaviors. As I'm only going to use punishment for aggression to the peer, self-endangering behaviors of running in the street. I'm not going to use that punisher for whining. I'm not going to use it for grabbing a toy. I'm not going to use it for refusing to take a bath. Because the punishment isn't going to change. We've got to figure out the refusal is probably more the avoidance, and there's a much better road to get there. So save your punishers. And again, I think you should all kind of think through of what would be a reasonable punisher. And let me talk about timeout just for a second, because that is a pretty powerful one for some kids. The way timeout works is that it's timeout from reinforcement. And by that we mean, I'm having fun. Right now, at this moment, I'm having fun. I'm in the playground, or I'm watching TV, or I'm doing something I enjoy doing. The transition from that setting to the hallway where there's nothing fun going on, for some kids is a form of punishment. That is, the transition from a fun place to a boring place is aversive. How do we know? If it decreases behavior. How could it be a reinforcer? Well, it might be that what I really want to do is be in this room. I used to be put in timeout quite a bit by the nuns in Catholic school. And Carl, remember this? They used to send us out to the cloakroom.
Beats algebra.
And there we go. You know, you can either do algebra or sit in the cloakroom by yourself. The nuns never got it. You know? I spent a lot of time in that cloakroom. That was great too, yeah, getting called to the office. So again, what we as adults often think is a punishment is not really a punishment. So again, we're looking at how do you make sure that that transition is really removing a positive, fun setting, that I'm having fun, and algebra isn't it, but yet playing outside may be a lot of fun, and then I throw rocks at my peer, bring them inside. Again, make sure as much as you can that a negative behavior doesn't get reinforced. Be careful about promising reinforcers for stopping. That is, you know, if you quit crying now, I'll give you some ice cream. Worst thing to do. What's going to happen? I'll quit crying. Oh, good deal. But what you've just done is reinforce crying. So you think the promise of a reinforcer is exactly the same as a reinforcer. And there's a lot of, I'll give you one classroom example that's driven me nuts for decades. There's a strong tendency in many schools, and again I exist in a different world, where kids will fall on the floor and the staff will go down and say, remember what you're working for, and they're waving the iPad in front of the kid. And the kid pops up and sits down and goes to work. It says, they don't see what happens. What happens is the promise of a reinforcer increases falling on the floor. How do you know? They fall on the floor again in 2 minutes or 5 minutes, or the demand comes back, and the staff member goes back, remember what you're working for. It's crazy. And that's this one. Be careful about promising reinforcers for better behavior. When they give you better behavior, then deliver the reinforcer on your terms. The promise, you just gave up your reinforcer. They're going to get the iPad, and they'll do anything you want them to do at that point. It doesn't change the behavior. Don't show them the reinforcers when they're engaging in negative behavior. Promise them or anything. Don't try and talk a child down. You know, you need to calm down now. It's like, it'll be all right, it'll be all right. Now again, we have a strong parent tendency to want to do that. And it may be not such a problem with a typically developing kid with verbal behavior and that has emotional issues. But yet if you've got a child that their language skills are problematic, they don't have the comprehension necessarily, we may find that all we do is make the problem worse. It's hard to teach people to kind of be cool about all this. You know? Be calm. Limited kind of facial stuff. Don't get bent out of shape. And that's where, you know, again we say, all right, time out. As opposed to you showing that you're out of control. It's like, oh, that really upsets me when you do that. I've had it. You go into your room. Again, maybe that's more action than the kid really deserves. Okay, be organized. Have a plan. Again, if you're saying, I've got a particular problem that I want to face, anticipate your child's needs then regarding that problem before he forces you to deal with the problem. That is, again, you want to be in charge and control the behavior. You want to be careful about having the child control your behavior. And again, it takes a little time. The avoid situations where you think might make the child irritable, staying up too late, eating too much sugar. I mean, these are just things that we do with kids, and you say, well, it's potentially the case that we should make sure you get a good night's sleep, or that you know, I may want to, I'm forced to drag the child along to things that I have to do, and I know that's always going to cause a problem. Then we need to make changes. And again, here's part of the reason is that I may have to shop. I got to get stuff done. If I'm going to take the child with me and I know I'm going to have problems, I'm in a behavioral trap where I'm now in a public place and I now have a screaming, tantruming child. I got to reinforce them. You know, it's like it's socially embarrassing. You can't really do what needs to be done. You might try. And I always, you know, I'm in the store and there's a kid screaming and tantruming and the parent is just ignoring it totally. I'll often go up and say, because the parent, everybody's going, oh, bad mother, don't you see your child needs you and all of this stuff. And they don't get it. And the parent's doing exactly the right thing. And it's important that people at least acknowledge that, you know, we get it, that, you know, just muscle through it. And that's right. This is kind of the issue of that. If you can't control the behavior in your house under a setting that you can control, if we can't control it here at Baca, you're never going to establish control in a social setting. The odds are against you, just like I said with the church or with the shopping, is that you can't compete with the social contingencies that are out there. You can't do what needs to be done. That is, what might need to be done is ignore the negative behavior. You can't do that publicly easily. And that's where, again, the suggestion is get control of the behavior in a setting you control. Then generalize to settings that you don't control. So if you kind of follow things in that pattern, you at least got a better shot at it. And this is our teaching the others, our 19-year-old, of working as much as we can, just some basic kind of tips. And you can go into the 19-year-old and say, listen, just ignore them and go on with your swimming. And you don't have to say, what you need to do is learn behavior modification and take a class and learn about differential reinforcement and da-da-da-da-da.
Bobby, give you a call.
You know, and you know, as we wrap up here, the issue is that problem behaviors are not necessarily simple. I mean, they're complicated. And part of our task, whether it's a child with disabilities or a typically developing child, we want the child to kind of get through life in a happy, kind of adjusted way where things are working for the child. They're getting the things that they want, and that negative behavior doesn't become their kind of way of interacting with other people and so on. That is, untreated, almost always negative behavior will get worse in just general kind of treatment. Again, because of those naturally occurring, it's hard not to react to tantrums. It's hard to keep forcing a child in demands and such. And this is kind of a more proactive approach. So just the summary statements now of what we said. If you keep in mind the child was not born with tantrums. They may be born with crying, but the crying is for other reasons. They're hungry, thirsty, tired, want physical contact, and they have no other way other than crying. But kicking, biting, screaming, scratching, tearing things, throwing things, hurting other people, those are all learned in the lifetime. And that is good news. It's not a genetically programmed. You're not born to be aggressive. It's not due to autism. It's due to a learning history, which we can do something about. And that's where, again, what behavior analysis offers is that whole view that most human behavior is learned. If it's learned, if we figure out how was it acquired? How did you learn to do this? Why do you do that? It gives us some direction anyway of saying, here's what we need to do to teach you an alternative behavior or teach you that this behavior just is not going to work. And that's where the point of consistency, mom and dad got to be on the same page. The school and home got to be on the same page. We say everybody, when he whines, everybody's got to react in the same way. Don't look at it. Don't give him attention. And all it takes is one person to give attention, and it's great. Kids learn pretty quickly. You know, if mom won't give it to me, I go to dad. If dad won't, I go to my sister. And the 4 steps to reduce the negative behavior, and this is kind of the summary. Use your 3-term contingency to figure out the cause. This is the critical step. If you don't do this, we don't know whether to ignore it or to use timeout or some other kind of intervention procedure. Prevent the problem, change the level of demand, increase your prompts, make it easier for the child to brush their teeth by hand-over-hand prompts. Have reinforcers readily available for them for approximations. So, you know, they're not going to pass any of the dentist's requirement for good toothbrushing, but it's an approximation. Step 3, actively teach the positive behaviors and continue to build on them. Identify ranges of reinforcers and frequently give them for good behavior. 4, you got to do something different. Whatever you're currently doing, is it working? If it's working, that's great. If you still have the negative behavior, you've got to react to it differently and somehow. And again, how that is depends on the behavior and your analysis of that. Negative behavior often gets reinforced more often than positive behavior. And I gave you the 10-to-1 rule. Flip it around to where positive behavior gets reinforced at least 10 times to every 1 negative behavior. And I don't know if I say this next to the slide, but again, keep in mind that rule that reinforcement can be reprimands, it can be negative stuff, it can be scowling, it can be all kinds of things that we don't think of as reinforcement. Anything that increases behavior, by definition, is reinforcement. So we want to be careful we don't do that. Ignore the minor misbehaviors. Our change is going to be gradual. You're not going to change behavior problems overnight. It often takes quite some time. And I say learn as much about behavior analysis as you can, and that's kind of my mantra, is that it is a powerful tool. It's probably of all the different branches of psychology that we've got out there, and there are many, many psychologists that would tell you, try this, try that. Behavior analysis gives you some really scientific, evidence-based, data-based kind of ways of changing behavior. That's what this field is about. Thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful for you. This PowerPoint you can download from my website, and I'll make it available for BACA so they can provide access. If your spouse or others weren't able to make it, we videoed this. If you found this of value and want somebody else to watch it, BACA will make it available to you. So thank you.